Welcome to Your City on Community 7 Television. I'm Schutz Wies and I'm your host. Each month we look at a different aspect of what's going on in the city of Billings. This month we're going to talk about code enforcement. We have Nicole Cromwell here. She's in charge of zoning and code enforcement with the city of Billings. And we also have Tanya Punt. She's one of the code enforcement officers for the city of Billings. Let's meet Nicole and Tanya and talk about code enforcement. Well, welcome, Nicole. Thanks for being on the program with us.
Thank you, Schutz, for having us on.
All right. Well, we're going to talk a lot about the code enforcement and some about planning division, I imagine, a little bit. But before we do that, give us a little bit about your history and background. Did you grow up in the area? Did you come to the area?
Well, no, I was not born and raised in Montana, but I've adopted Montana and Billings as my hometown, my forever hometown. Yeah. I grew up both in Texas and on the East Coast. I went to college in the Midwest, and I found Yellowstone National Park after college and fell in love, and then moved back here.
All right. So is that, how did you get started in the area? What kind of jobs did you have, and how did you get to the planning department with the city of Billings?
Well, I started on the East Coast. I was an elected planning official, and then kind of learned the ropes from there. I had work in the private sector, working with local planning divisions and local governments about code enforcement of all types of regulations.
Okay. All right, and then kind of what drew you into that line of work? Why did you say, planning, code enforcement? That's something that I would be interested in. What kind of drew you into that line of work?
It was more about learning about how neighborhoods work, how things, all the pieces and parts fit together to make a place, basically. So that was my main interest in that, and learning how all of those pieces come together and how they stay together through enforcement of codes was kind of my niche.
Okay. So tell us about what is your role with the planning department with the city of Billings, and then talk to us a little bit about code enforcement and what it is.
Okay. Well, I'm the zoning coordinator. I manage Project Recode, which is wrapping up this spring. And then I also supervise the 5 staff of the Code Enforcement Division. And Code Enforcement Division, my role is to try and stay out of their way as they do what they do in the community to make sure that neighborhoods stay intact, stay great places to live. Whether that's making sure people are shoveling their snow off their sidewalks or dealing with somebody who's just completely abandoned a property, everything in between. But basically, I just give them the roles that they have and say, stay between the lines here and we'll be good.
Sure. Talk about what is give us the connectivity between the planning department and the zoning coordination and the code enforcement division. Why are they housed under the same roof?
Well, they're housed under the same roof because we deal with land use. Planning is in advance. We plan to use the land this way. We zone it in a certain way. We put standards and requirements in place. And then afterwards, if you don't enforce those, then you kind of end up with a jumble. You end up with chaos. And so that's the other part of land use, is making sure that those codes are followed.
Okay. And give us an idea of maybe what's the difference between, say, code enforcement and maybe law enforcement, right? So we have rules with the city of Billings. Some of those are enforced by law enforcement, and some must be the other way. So what's the difference, I guess, between what law enforcement does and what code enforcement does?
Well, code enforcement is dealing mainly with property and the people who may own it. And the police deal with people, always with people. And whatever criminal activity that may be happening, whether that's a robbery, they are on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We are more of a weekday, normal business hours. There's no emergencies there's no zoning 911. And I try to emphasize that we need to work at a pace that isn't going to break you. So really that's the difference, but there's a lot of crossover. There's a lot of support for each other that we do on a regular basis between police and code enforcement.
Let's talk a little bit about that crossover. Is there Is there someone at the police department that when they have an issue that's maybe less of a people issue and more of a property issue, do they have someone that you guys work with on a consistent basis that kind of gets what code enforcement does, and what kind of issues do they bring to you?
Well, of course, we work with the sergeants and then the upper level management, but also with the patrol officers. Our code enforcement staff goes whenever there's new hires to the police department, just to tell them what we're all about and to call us if they need help with a property issue that maybe is in addition to what they're dealing with. We also have training for dispatchers and 911 so they know what calls to refer to us and which ones should go to the police. Sometimes it doesn't always happen in the right order. So sometimes a police officer will go investigate. So, no, this isn't really a people thing. This is property. I'm going to send this back. And we get it in code enforcement.
Okay. And then are there issues that you guys find in code enforcement and you kind of get out there and you go, this is maybe more of a people issue. And then how do you send that back over to them?
Well, that's really easy part. And sometimes it's something that we go to the property and it was a property issue, and it's just the tip of the iceberg. We see something that just doesn't look right to us, and we'll send that information directly over to the police department and say, you may want to check this out if you haven't already.
I imagine there's also probably properties that you guys have both worked on that are well known between the departments, and you kind of know what you're getting into when you go there.
Yes, we try to make sure our officers have all the tools and information necessary when they go out in the field because they're not armed. They're really there just to talk with people and see what's going on with their property.
All right. Do you have some times of the years that are busier than other times of the years, or does it stay pretty consistent over the course of the year?
Oh, we have our busy times. Generally, this time of year is snow season. So when people are not shoveling their walks after snow has finished, we get a lot of calls. We get a lot of calls, especially even in the commercial areas where people are trying to walk to different businesses. It's really a hard time of year for people who are slightly disabled or even fully disabled to get around on the sidewalks if they're not shoveled, if the ramps aren't cleared. So we try and make sure that those places do get shoveled when we get complaints. We have started working this year with our transportation division to make sure that safe routes to school, walking routes, are also cleared of snow, and just notifying the property owners along those routes to make sure that they clear the sidewalks after the snow is done, of course, not continually. Sometimes we have big snows. Then in the spring and summer, we have our nuisance weed season and garage sale sign season. And that's super busy. Super busy. The weeds pop up and so the garage sale signs. So we take care of all that.
Yeah. And I imagine this year political sign season is coming up as well.
Oh, sure. What we don't particularly go after people who put signs on their own property. It's the signs that get put on the boulevards and in the public right-of-ways, the box in the middle of the road with the rocks in it. Those are the signs that we pick up and bring back.
All right, and then maybe during some of the slow times of the year, is that when you can maybe focus on I guess projects isn't the right word, but problems that are maybe bigger in scope and that are going to take some time to deal with?
Yeah, that is a time for some officers to use that slow time, but we do have a dedicated officer who works with those nuisance properties year-round. That's all that officer does, and so he was hired 3 years ago, and we're working down through a really big list we built up over the last 3 decades of properties that have basically been walked away from. People who didn't have heirs died, and nobody got the property. So we're working through a lot of different situations right now with those properties.
So in a situation like that where someone dies and they don't have heirs, is that something that A, you're probably going to get a complaint about, or B, the courts actually come to you guys and ask for assistance with?
Well, no. The complaints come to our office, and we've discovered a couple of years ago that there's a law on the state books that says that any property that dies without heirs automatically goes to the state of Montana.
Oh, okay.
The Attorney General's office manages that process to get the state in that property into their ownership, but they have to have a local person or agent, a special administrator, to do that. And so this past fall, the State Attorney General's office appointed the Code Enforcement Division to be the special administrator for 3 properties.
Okay. Wow, right on. And so then once they go through that process and it becomes owned by the state of Montana, does then the DNRC kind of take over and do land management at that point?
No. What the Attorney General's office has told us their preferred method or path is that we clean it up, get it ready for sale, sell it, pay ourselves back for all of our expenses, and whatever's left over goes to them.
Okay, so it goes to the Attorney General's office.
Right.
Okay, to do this type of thing. Yeah. Is that a similar situation that they would have with a code enforcement division in, say, Missoula or Bozeman or Great Falls or something like that? Do you know what kind of relationships they have in those locations?
They don't have any. This is something that we're kind of making up as we go along. It's not often that property is abandoned like that through the death of a property owner. So we just happen to have a lot of them right now that have accumulated. So the Attorney General's office and our office are trying to, like, okay, this seems right, let's do it this way. Mm-hmm. So it's working pretty well.
Okay. So you talked about the officer that's working through those nuisance properties. What kind of things are they doing to work with those landowners? What kind of issues do they have that they need to clean up? And then how do they get out of, okay, they're not in compliance anymore?
Well, we do everything possible with property owners to get them into compliance. Additional time, getting resources that they can't get themselves, talking about whatever it is preventing them from getting into compliance, encouraging them to, if the property is just too much for you to manage anymore, perhaps think about selling it or asking somebody to come in as a partner with you. All kinds of things that we offer to people to help them get in compliance. But sometimes we do have to go to court. And we've been to court a lot in the last year because we just had that many properties kind of coming through that process all at the same time.
Okay. How does somebody go about making a complaint? Let's just say that I live next to a lot and that landowner, for whatever reason, decides they're not going to cut their grass anymore. What's available to me to do that?
Phone, email, walk in the door, send us something through U.S. mail. Easiest way, though, is on our online complaint form, which is on the city's website. Under Code Enforcement Division, complaint form, you pick the area where your complaint is, and then that automatically emails directly to the officer and to our clerk. You can also pick up the phone and call Trina Adams, our clerk, 237-6146. And if she's not there, leave her a message, and she'll make sure that complaint gets to the right officer.
All right. I'm going to ask this question. I do know the answer already, but I think it is an important question to ask. If I live next to someone and their yard is a mess, and I say to myself, boy, I wish somebody would take care of that, but nobody ever takes care of that. How come nobody ever takes care of that?
Well, the important answer to that is that we have very few officers for the entire city of Billings. We have 2 officers that work on a regular basis all over the city in residential and commercial areas, and we have the 1 officer who works just on the nuisance properties. So we cannot do proactive enforcement on any regular basis. Of course, if you call us about that dirty yard and we drive down your block of that street and we find 5 others in the same condition, we'll notify everybody of the same problem. But we don't have time to patrol or go and make sure neighborhoods, that don't complain get the same level of service.
So you really have to have that complaint really to get the ball to get the ball rolling. If you're in that situation and you're wondering why it's not happening, it's because that complaint needs to go out there to get the ball rolling, and then an officer will come out.
Yes, generally, as I said, we're not 911 service, but we try to get there within a week of receiving a complaint and make an inspection. And if there is a problem, we follow up right then with the property owner and say, you need to correct these problems.
All right. If I do make that complaint, does my neighbor know it was me that made the complaint? Do you guys reveal that to them, or do you have to, or how does that work?
Well, it's considered confidential information once it's in our office. And we don't reveal that to the property owner. We also take anonymous complaints. So even if you use our online complaint form, you don't have to put your name or phone number or anything in there to file a complaint. If we do have to go to court with somebody on a problem, and we do know who you are as a complainant, we do have to reveal that, but only once it's in court.
All right, Nicole, well, thank you so much for talking to us about code enforcement and what you do. I know we're going to have one of your officers on to talk about some more specifics about some of that stuff, but thank you for all you do for the city and all that your officers do. I know it's not necessarily always the easiest or fun job out there, but a very important one, so thank you.
You're welcome, Schutz, and thanks for having us on.
We're joined now by Tanya Punt. Tanya is one of the code enforcement officers that Nicole was just talking about. So, Tanya, thank you for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for being on. So, we're going to talk about code enforcement and how it works. But before we do that, talk to us a little bit about yourself and your background. Did you grow up here in the area, or did you come to the area?
I actually came to the area. I was born and raised in California. I moved here in 1996. Basically, kind of got transferred here with a job that I was doing at that time. After a few years here, I just kind of want to change in my career. Went on to be a misdemeanor probation officer for the city of Billings. I was doing that for about 10 years, and then this position became available, and I put in for it, and I got it.
All right, very good. And what are some of the other things that you've done before you became a code enforcement officer?
Well, I was a probation officer for about 10 years here for the city, misdemeanor probation, and then prior to that, I was a contraband canine handler who had contracts with various school districts around the United States to go in and do searches.
All right, very good. And then what kind of, I know you were doing the probation, but what kind of drew you into code enforcement? Why did you think that would be a good switch for you?
Well, what I liked most about it is it was something that was going to be changing on a daily basis. I wouldn't go to the same place every single day. Calls would be different, and I think that's one of the things that encouraged me the most to put in for something like this.
All right. So give me your overview. What does a code enforcement officer do? What are you out there to do?
Basically, we're going to make sure that your neighborhood, your community is safe and remains appealing, so you can hold your property value.
How is your role, I guess, different than a law enforcement officer who's out there each and every day?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is we don't have a lot of the same resources that the officers do. We don't have radios. We don't have backup. It's pretty much an individual go to your call and carry through on your own.
Nicole told us, that there's kind of some code enforcement officer, and one is dealing with long-standing nuance issues. What is your kind of role in the code enforcement department?
So I'm primarily dealing with a lot of residential and some commercial complaints. The areas that I cover would be the south side, the north side, the Heights, and the Briarwood Golf Course Division.
Okay. So let's kind of walk through, a complaint comes in. I'm driving by and I see that there's some weeds out there and I don't like them. And so I call the office and say, I was driving by this property and there's weeds out there and they're doing nothing about it. I want you guys to do something about it. What happens at that point? How does that come? What are you doing from that point forward?
So with the weed complaints, it's a seasonal thing. Runs from the beginning of May until the end of September. Basically, what we do is we get a complaint come in. We'll drive out to that property and confirm that it is a weed overgrown. We send them a 10-day notice, basically saying you need to make sure the weeds are cut down on any yards, alleys, or boulevards attached to this property. Send the notices out, and then we set them up for about a 10-day reinspection to go see if they're done. If they're not cut, or if they have not been cut, we send them off to our Parks Department to get those trimmed.
Okay, and then does the property owner get the bill for doing that?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. One of the biggest things, again, that's kind of a seasonal thing, but one of the other biggest ones that we deal with are open storage, junk vehicles. So, those particular cases are going to take a little bit longer. We'll go out, get pictures of the open storage. When we send out our first notice, very detailed and highlighted, this was what the code violation is, this is what needs to be removed. If we can get this into compliance, this case will be done and closed. And so we keep that open for communication, and it seems like I always include in my notes, please call me if you have any questions. I'll do what I can to help you out.
Okay, so let's move on to maybe a different type of complaint. There's just a property next to me that I just don't think is up to code. I call in and say that. What are your processes for in that particular situation?
So people will call us up and say that they have their concerns about this particular property. They don't like the way it looks. It's got broken windows. It has junk vehicles. So yeah, we'll go by and we'll take a look at it. Usually within about 24 hours of getting a call or an email or an anonymous complaint, we can go out and do an inspection and see how this looks. Again, we confirm what code violations we can take care of, getting pictures of those specifically and including those pictures with the notices that we send out.
All right. And then typically in a situation like that, how long does the homeowner have to kind of remedy that situation? There's some windows broken out. I'm aware of that, but I just haven't had a chance to fix it, and it's kind of been a nice spring anyway. So it's been fine. How long do you usually have to kind of remedy that stuff?
Usually within that first notice, it's 10 days, and we get a lot of compliance. I would say a high 90% of people will get into compliance with their property within that first notice. We go back out after that 10-day and do a re-inspection. If some things have been done and some things haven't, we'll update our pictures and include those with our second and final notice saying, okay, this has been taken care of. Here's the remaining issues that we have. Once these items are done again, we can close this case out.
Okay. What if you show up and, you get there and it's an elderly couple and they haven't been, it's been rough and he's been sick and she's been sick and they just have no capacity whatsoever to get this done. What kind of remedies are available in that particular type of case?
Well, we've talked to people. We have neighbors that'll reach out to people like that. We have family members that we'll get a hold of and let them know what's going on. They've reached out to their family members as well. I've had a few cases where it was just easier for me to extend the time that I could give them. I have a family that has a lot of open storage, and when I made contact with them, they're going through chemotherapy and asking just to get through this chemo. So we've given them 6 months to get everything completely taken care of before I'll even go back out.
Okay. What if you can't get a hold of a landowner? There's a property there and it's run down and it's owned by John Doe and there's no way to figure out who John Doe is and where he is and what he's doing. What are kind of some of the remedies you have in those cases?
Well, we've posted the properties before. We've actually did a poster sign, including our letters. We put that on their property. We've printed things in newspapers as far as, looking for the current owners, titles, everything that we can search for and count down to, we will try to get those.
Okay. What does a typical week look like in your office? Or a typical month or whatever would be kind of a typical cycle? What does that look like in your office?
So basically, I get to work a little bit after 5 in the morning. It's easier for me to get to the office early in the morning. A lot of times that's the best time somebody says, call me early before I go to work. So I'll return phone calls, answer emails, and then I typically have my rechecks set up on Monday. So all my rechecks are done on Mondays. And then Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, I go to the south side, the north side, and the heights and follow up on any new cases that were called in.
How often, I know Nicole mentioned this, how often I called in a complaint and I drove through that neighborhood and, man, there's 5 more that are right next to that. How often does that happen?
It happens a lot. It happens a lot. And I wish there was a lot of times where I could self-initiate some things. But unless it's directly related to this particular property, we open up the case that we're supposed to open up and go from there.
Have you ever stop and talk to the complainants and say, I would sure love to hear from you about this particular issue while I'm out here?
Yeah, I've told them that you're anonymous. I can't self-initiate, but if there's something else going on in your neighborhood that you'd like us to look into, please let us know so we can get this started.
Okay. Are you able to make it out just like some of the neighborhood councils and stuff like that and talk to them and let them know about this information as well?
We've talked to them in the past. They've had some questions, and we were able to share some answers with them.
Okay, all right. If there was one thing you could change about code enforcement, what would be the one thing you would change?
I think one of my biggest things that I'd like to do is to be able to self-initiate. I know what code violations are. A lot of people aren't aware of all the codes that are out there. So I think being able to initiate some of my own complaints might be easier. It might take some of the stress off the people who are afraid to call in their complaints also.
Sure. All right. Well, in the spirit of that, I know Nicole gave us all the ways that we can call in a complaint, but let's go through it again. What are the ways that I can complain about what's going on in my neighborhood that gets to you?
So you can go online through the city website. You can go down to our office and do an anonymous fill-in-the-blank complaint form. You can call our office, 657-8288, leave a message. We'll get back to you just as soon as we possibly can.
Okay, very good. Well, Tanya, thanks so much for coming on and talking to us about the life of a code enforcement officer. It sounds like a reality series waiting to happen.
Awesome.